The Arizona sun offered no mercy that day, baking the dust of Prescott's main street into a fine, choking powder. For 20-year-old Alice Mayfield, it was the air of her own funeral. She stood alone before the entire town, her calico dress a flag of surrender. Her shame was a tangible thing, a heavy cloak woven by whispers and righteous glares. Before her sat a man whose world was the jagged peaks and whispering canyons, an Apache warrior named Kyle. He was the price of her family's honor, the savage vessel for her banishment. Her father wouldn't meet her eyes. She was being handed over a life for a lie, and in the suffocating silence, she expected nothing but a new kind of hell. The lie had been born 3 weeks prior, in the cool shadow of a livery stable. It was a lie that smelled of hay, cheap whiskey, and the cloying sweetness of a forbidden touch. Alice hadn't been there, but she'd seen its aftermath in her younger sister Clara's eyes wide with a terror that eclipsed her 16 years. Clara, with her corn silk hair and a naivete that the harsh Arizona territory should have long since scoured away, had been found with Silas Wolfe. Not just any boy, but the son of Damon Wolfe, the man who owned the bank, the general store, and held the mortgage on nearly every soul in Prescott. Silas was weak-willed and spoiled, but he carried the Wolfe name, a shield of immunity. Clara carried only the Mayfield name, which until that moment had meant simple decency and hard work. Their father, Thomas Mayfield, was a blacksmith, his pride forged in the same fire as his horseshoes. When Damon Wolfe had stormed into their modest home, his face a thundercloud of puritanical fury, Thomas had seemed to shrink beside his own anvil. "Your daughter," Wolfe had spat his voice, cutting through the small room, "has sullied my son." She tempted him from the path of righteousness. It was a preposterous claim. Everyone knew of Silas's penchant for drink and cards, but in the court of Damon Wolfe's opinion, facts were malleable. Clara, trembling, had opened her mouth to speak, to confess her own part, but Alice had stepped forward. She saw the ruin in her father's face, the utter devastation that would follow. The Mayfields would be pariahs. They would lose their smithy, their home, their future. Clara would be branded for life. "It was me," Alice said, her voice steady despite the frantic pounding in her chest. "Clara had nothing to do with it. She came looking for me. It was I who met with Silas." The lie was audacious, a desperate gambit. Alice was known for her quiet reserve and sharp mind, the polar opposite of a girl who would trifle with the likes of Silas Wolfe. But Damon seized upon it. It was better cleaner. Punishing the elder, more resilient daughter was a more definitive statement. It allowed him to cast his own son as the victim of a cunning seductress. The punishment he devised was crueler than a public whipping or exile into the barren wastes. A delegation of Chiricahua Apache were due in town to negotiate safe passage for supply wagons through their territory. Tensions were high. A recent skirmish had left men dead on both sides. Wolfe, in a display of what he called Christian magnanimity and frontier justice, made an offer to the Apache leader, a warrior named Kyle. The town of Prescott would offer a gesture of profound trust. They would give one of their own women to the Chiricahua people to live among them as a bond of peace. Not as a hostage, he'd claimed, but as a bridge. Everyone knew what it was. It was a human sacrifice. It was Alice's banishment. And so she stood there, in the oppressive heat, the town a silent circle of accusers. Her father, his face ashen, had placed her worn, leather-bound book of herbs and remedies into her hands that morning. "Your mother would have wanted you to have this," He'd choked out the only words he could manage. Clara was a ghost at the window of their home, her face a mask of unshed tears and guilt. Kyle watched her from atop his powerful paint horse. His face was a landscape of its own, carved with lines of hardship and patience. He wore no feathered war bonnet, only a simple headband holding back his jet-black hair. His eyes, dark and intelligent, assessed her not with lust or contempt, but with an unnerving, analytical calm. He was younger than the other delegates, perhaps 30, but he carried an authority that was absolute. He was not a savage caricature from a dime novel. He was a man of substance and gravity, which only made Alice's fate more terrifyingly real. Sheriff Brody, a man whose spine had long been bent to Damon Wolfe's will, cleared his throat. "The agreement is made," he announced, his voice thin. "Alice Mayfield goes with the Ende the people as a sign of our enduring faith." Wolfe nodded, a grim smile touching his lips. He had scrubbed his family's name clean with the soap of Alice's life. Kyle nudged his horse forward. The animal's hooves were soft puffs in the thick dust. He did not dismount. He simply extended a hand. It was a strong hand, calloused and brown-scarred across the knuckles. It was not an invitation, but a command. Alice took a deep breath, the air thick with her own disgrace. She looked past Kyle to the jagged blue mountains on the horizon. They were her new home, or her grave. She didn't know which. Ignoring the proffered hand, she walked to a spare horse, a sturdy mare tied to Kyle's lead rope. With a strength born of desperation, she gathered her skirt and pulled herself into the saddle. It was a clumsy, graceless motion, but she did it herself. She would not be lifted and placed like a sack of flour. A murmur went through the crowd. Kyle's expression didn't change, but a flicker of something surprise, respect passed through his dark eyes. He gave a sharp, guttural command to his men. Without a backward glance at the town of Prescott, the Apache delegation turned their horses and began the slow ride east. A disgraced woman, their unlikely prize. The dust rose behind them, a curtain falling on the first act of Alice Mayfield's life. The world she knew dissolved behind her. The clapboard buildings, the church steeple, the very scent of civilization. Wood smoke, baking bread, manure, faded, replaced by the raw, untamed perfume of the desert sagebrush. Hot rock, and an unnerving, expansive emptiness. For 3 days they rode. The silence was a language Alice did not understand. The Apache warriors spoke to each other in low, flowing tones, a music of clicks and soft vowels that was as alien as the landscape. To her, they said nothing. Kyle rode at the head of the party, his posture unwavering. He seemed a part of the land itself. His eyes constantly scanning the horizon, reading the subtle signs of the earth, a broken twig, a disturbed patch of pebbles, the flight of a distant hawk. He never looked back at her, yet. She felt his awareness of her as a constant pressing weight. She was a parcel he was delivering, a responsibility he had shouldered for reasons she couldn't fathom. Her body ached in ways she'd never imagined. The saddle rubbed her raw, the sun beat down relentlessly, and the nights were a shock of cold that seeped into her bones. They ate jerky that was tough as leather and drank sparingly from canteens. No one offered her comfort. No one offered her cruelty either. She was simply there, an object, a ghost riding among them. The other warriors watched her. One, a younger man with a perpetual scowl and a jagged scar on his cheek, made his disdain clear. His name was Taza, and his eyes followed her with open hostility. He saw her as she was, a white woman, an interloper, the symbol of a people who had taken their land and broken their promises. He would spit on the ground when she drew her water ration, his meaning clear, without a single word. On the third evening, as they made a cold camp in a rocky arroyo, Alice's resolve began to fray. Her hands were blistered from the reins, her lips cracked and bleeding. As she slid from her horse, her legs gave way, and she stumbled, falling hard onto the stony ground. A sharp pain shot through her ankle. Taza let out a short, derisive laugh. The other warriors ignored her. She lay there for a moment, the dust gritty against her cheek, a wave of despair washing over her. The tears she had refused to shed in Prescott now burned behind her eyes. This was it. She would be left here, a broken toy. But then a shadow fell over her. Kael stood there, his face impassive in the dying light. He looked down at her, then at her ankle, which was already beginning to swell. He said nothing. He simply crouched, and before she could react, his strong fingers probed the injury. His touch was firm, clinical, without a trace of gentleness, yet surprisingly sure. He moved the joint, his eyes fixed on her face, gauging her reaction. She bit her lip to keep from crying out. He rose and walked away, disappearing into the twilight. Alice's heart sank. He was leaving her. But moments later, he returned with a handful of broad, fleshy leaves. He crushed them between two stones, creating a green, pungent poultice. Again, he knelt. He took her foot in his hand, an act of such shocking intimacy it stole her breath, and carefully applied the crushed leaves to her swollen ankle. Then, using a strip of leather from his own saddlebag, he bound it tightly. He met her eyes for the first time since the journey began. His gaze was intense, unreadable. "It is not broken," he said. His English was heavily accented, but clear. "You will ride." It was not a comfort. It was a command. But it was also the first acknowledgement that she was more than cargo. She was a person who could break, and who, in his estimation, needed to be mended to continue the journey. She nodded, unable to find her voice. They arrived at the Chiricahua Rancheria at dusk on the 5th day. It was not a village of teepees, as she had imagined from stories, but a scattered encampment nestled in a high mountain valley, shielded by towering pines and ancient rock formations. The dwellings, called wickiups, were dome-shaped structures of branches and hides, blending seamlessly into the landscape. Smoke from cooking fires drifted on the breeze, carrying the scent of roasting meat and pine needles. Their arrival caused an immediate stir. Women stopped their work. Children fell silent, their dark eyes wide with curiosity and suspicion. They stared at Alice, at her pale skin and strange clothes. She was an alien creature in their world. She pulled her worn shawl tighter around her shoulders, feeling 100 pairs of eyes dissecting her. Taza dismounted and immediately began speaking in a rapid, angry torrent to a group of elders gesturing toward Alice. His meaning was clear. "This is what our leader has brought us. A white woman." Kael ignored him. He dismounted and addressed an old woman who emerged from the largest wickiup. She was ancient, her face a beautiful map of wrinkles, her hair white and braided with silver ornaments. There was a deep wisdom in her eyes, a calm authority that reminded Alice of a mountain that had weathered 1,000 storms. Kael spoke to her in their language, his tone filled with a respect he had shown no one else. The old woman, whose name Alice would later learn, was Nalin, listened patiently. Her gaze then fell upon Alice, and it was different from the others. It was not hostile, but it was profoundly searching, as if she were looking straight into Alice's soul, weighing her spirit. Finally, Nalin spoke a single word to Kael, then turned and pointed toward a small, isolated wickiup at the edge of the camp. It was little more than a hut clearly used for storage or for someone of low standing. The message was clear. You are here, but you are not one of us. You are on the outside looking in. Kael turned to Alice. This is your place, he said, his voice flat. He then handed her a water skin and a small bundle that contained more jerky and a cake of ground corn. You will be given food. You are expected to work. He pointed toward a group of women grinding corn on flat stones. You will help them tomorrow. And with that, he turned and walked toward us, the center of the camp, leaving her standing alone beside the small hut, the sounds of a life she was not part of, swirling around her. The weight of her solitude was immense. She had been delivered. Her journey was over, but her trial had just begun. That night, huddled under a single thin blanket in the dark, unfamiliar shelter, Alice clutched the book her father had given her and wept not for the home she had lost, but for the utter crushing loneliness of the one she had found. The days that followed were a crucible. Alice rose before the sun, her first task to haul water from the cold mountain stream that fed the valley. The Apache women were strong and tireless, and they offered her no quarter. They communicated with her through gestures, pointing her toward tasks, scraping hides until her arms burned, gathering firewood until her back screamed, grinding corn on a matete until her knees were numb from kneeling on the hard-packed earth. Taza and his clique of young warriors made her life a quiet misery. They would accidentally kick over her bucket of water, forcing her to make the long trip to the stream again. They would mutter insults just loud enough for her to hear the Apache word for white woman, Indalikova, spoken like a curse. Alice learned to ignore them. She kept her head down, her hands busy, and her heart walled off. She did the work without complaint, her face a mask of determined neutrality. She was being tested, and she would not break. Her only respite was Nalin, the old woman who was Kael's grandmother. Nalin would often watch her from the entrance of her wickiup. One afternoon, as Alice struggled to soften a stiff deer hide her hands, clumsy and ineffective, Nalin approached. She didn't speak. She simply took the scraping tool from Alice's hand and with practiced, efficient motions showed her the proper angle, the right pressure to apply. Alice watched, mesmerized by the economy and grace of her movements. She mimicked the old woman, and the work became instantly easier. A silent lesson had been given and received. This became their routine. Nalin would teach her through demonstration how to find the edible roots, how to weave a watertight basket from yucca fibers, how to stitch sinew so it would hold fast. And Alice in turn began to learn the language. She listened to the children play, to the women talk as they worked. She picked up words, then phrases. Gojor beauty balance. Shik is my friend. Hosh cactus. The world around her slowly began to have names. Kael remained a distant, formidable presence. He was the Nantan, the leader. His days were spent hunting leading patrols and holding council with the elders. He rarely spoke to Alice directly, but she felt his eyes on her. She would see him watching as she learned to bake bread on a hot stone, or as she tried to soothe a crying baby. He observed her struggles and her small triumphs from afar, his expression as unreadable as ever. His silence was a constant question mark hanging over her existence. Why had he accepted the deal? What did he truly want from her? Her breakthrough came on a night when a fever swept through the camp. It was a vicious, consuming heat that struck the youngest and the oldest first. The medicine man, a stern figure named Desoda, performed his chants and offered his sacred pollen. But the fever did not yield. A little boy, the son of a warrior named Chatto, was convulsing, his skin burning to the touch. His mother's wails were a knife in the heart of the anxious camp. Alice watched her own heart aching. The boy's symptoms were terrifyingly familiar. She had seen this fever before near Prescott. She hesitated, knowing the danger of interfering. She was an outsider, a despised one. To challenge the medicine man's authority was unthinkable. But as she watched the boy struggle for breath, she saw the face of her own sister Clara, small and vulnerable. She thought of her mother, a quiet woman who had possessed a deep knowledge of herbs and healing. The book her father had given her felt warm in her hands. She made a decision. Taking a deep breath, she walked to Narlin's wickiup. The old woman was inside her face, etched with worry. In her halting, newly learned Apache, Alice spoke. "Grandmother," she said, using the term of respect she had heard others use. "The boy, the fever, I have seen it." Narlin looked at her, her dark eyes sharp. "Desoda's medicine is strong." "It is," Alice agreed, choosing her words carefully. "But my mother, she knew the plants of the white man. There is a plant, a tree, that grows by the water, the willow. Its bark can break a fever." She opened her book, its pages filled with her mother's delicate script and drawings. She pointed to the sketch of a willow tree. Narlin studied the drawing for a long moment. It was a risk for her, too. To trust this outsider's medicine over their own was to challenge the traditions of her people. But the boy was dying. "Show me," Narlin said finally. Guided by Alice, a few of the women hurried to the stream and stripped bark from the willows growing there. They boiled it into a dark, bitter tea. Alice felt the hostile stares of Desoda and Taza as she worked, but Narlin's presence was her shield. With the old woman's approval, the boy's mother agreed to try the remedy. Alice helped the mother gently spoon the bitter liquid between the boy's cracked lips. For hours, she sat with them, bathing his forehead with cool water, speaking to him in soft, soothing English tones he couldn't understand, but seemed to respond to. The entire camp held its breath. Just before dawn, the crisis broke. The boy's convulsions ceased. A great sweat drenched his small body, and his breathing eased. The fever had broken. By morning, he was weak but lucid, asking for water. A wave of quiet awe moved through the camp. The mother wept with gratitude, clutching Alice's hand. Chatto, the boy's father, a stoic warrior, came to her and placed a hand over his heart in a gesture of profound thanks. Even some of Taza's friends looked at her with a new grudging respect. She had not used magic or prayers. She had used knowledge, a practical wisdom that had saved a life. That evening, as Alice sat outside her small wickiup, watching the stars emerge in the vast, clear sky, Kael approached. It was the first time he had sought her out since their arrival. He stood before her, a tall silhouette against the fading light. "The boy lives," he said. It was not a question. "Yes," she replied softly. He was silent for a long moment, studying her face. "In your town," he began, his voice low, "they cast you out for bringing shame. Here, you bring healing." He looked around the valley, at the wickiups glowing with the soft light of their fires, at the dark shapes of the mountains that cradled them. The sounds of the camp were gentle now, a mother singing a lullaby, the soft laughter of men sharing a story. It was a community, a home that had nearly rejected her. "My wife," he said, his voice suddenly thick with an old pain that startled her, "was taken by a fever like this before the white soldiers came to this valley. My daughter, too. Our medicine was not strong enough." It was a revelation that cracked his stoic facade, offering her a glimpse of the man beneath the warrior. He was not just a leader. He was a man who had suffered an unbearable loss. He saw in her act of healing not just the saving of a child, but a ghost of what could have been for his own family. Alice's heart ached for him. "I am sorry," she whispered. He shook his head as if to clear the memory. He looked down at her, and his eyes held a new light, not pity, but a deep, resonant understanding. He saw her now not as the white woman from Prescott, not as a political pawn, but as Alice, a woman of strength and purpose. "The people of Prescott did not know what they were throwing away," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "They cast you out, but you do not belong there. You belong right here." The words hung in the cool night air. It was not a declaration of love, not yet. It was something more fundamental. It was a statement of belonging. He was telling her that her place was not defined by her birth or her past shame, but by her actions and her character. Here in this wild, harsh land that she had feared among a people who had first despised her, she had found a purpose. For the first time since she'd taken her sister's blame, Alice felt the first fragile tendrils of a new beginning. She felt impossibly that she was home. The delicate peace Alice had found was as fragile as a desert flower. Her acceptance within the tribe grew day by day. The women now included her in their conversations, teaching her their stories and songs. The children followed her, asking for a taste of the sweet candy she learned to make from prickly pear cactus. Chatto and his family treated her as honored kin. Even Taza's animosity had softened to a wary, watchful truce. He no longer saw a weak white woman, but a person of undeniable medicine. Her relationship with Kael deepened, though it remained a thing of quiet moments and unspoken understanding. He would seek her out to discuss the properties of a plant he'd found, or to share a piece of smoked venison from a successful hunt. He taught her the Chiricahua names for the stars, weaving for her the stories of their creation. In his presence, she felt a sense of safety and rightness that was entirely new. The shame of Prescott was a distant scar fading with each passing sunrise. But the past was not dead. It was merely lost and wandering. 2 months after Alice's arrival, a pair of Apache scouts patrolling the tribe's southern hunting grounds found a white man. He was delirious with thirst and fever, his horse long gone, his clothes ripped to shreds by thorns and rocks. He was near death. They brought him back to the rancheria, a strange piece of human flotsam washed up on their shores. Narlin and Alice were called to tend to him. As Alice knelt beside the unconscious figure and wiped the grime from his face with a damp cloth, her blood ran cold. The weak, handsome face, now gaunt and bearded, was horribly familiar. It was Silas Wolfe. The breath caught in her throat. He was the reason she was here, the cause of the lie that had shattered her life. Seeing him here in the heart of the Apache camp felt like a waking nightmare. Narlin, seeing the look on Alice's face, touched her arm. "You know this man?" she asked softly. Alice could only nod, her mind reeling. Under their care, Silas slowly recovered his strength. When he finally opened his eyes and they focused on Alice, his face crumpled with a mixture of terror, astonishment, and a profound, soul-deep shame. "Alice," he rasped, his voice barely a whisper. "What? How?" The story came out in a torrent of guilt-ridden confessions. Consumed by what his father had done, and haunted by his own cowardice, Silas had finally confronted Damon. He'd demanded his father tell the town the truth and bring Alice back. Damon had reacted with cold fury, threatening to disown Silas and have him committed as a madman. Terrified and broken, Silas had fled Prescott in the dead of night, riding aimlessly into the wilderness, intending to disappear. He had no plan, only a desperate need to escape the prison of his own life. His confession, overheard by a warrior who understood some English, spread through the camp like wildfire. The truth was now revealed, and it was far uglier than anyone had imagined. Alice had not been given in shame for her own transgression. She had been a scapegoat, a sacrifice to cover the sins of a powerful man's son. The peace offering from Prescott was a lie built on a foundation of deeper lies. The mood in the camp shifted instantly. The newfound respect for Alice curdled into a renewed, furious anger at the deceit of the Inder. Taza's hostility returned with a vengeance. "This is the truth of them," he snarled at a council meeting Kael convened that evening. He jabbed a finger in Silas's direction, who was being held under guard. "They send us an innocent woman to cover their own filth. They speak of peace while their hearts are rotten with lies. This man," he pointed at Silas, "is the son of the one who deceived us. He is proof of their treachery. His life should be forfeit for the insult." Many warriors murmured in agreement. Their pride had been wounded. They had been made fools of. An eye for an eye was the law of the mountains. Kael listened, his face like carved stone. His eyes found Alice, who stood at the edge of the circle. The revelation had placed him in an impossible position. His authority rested on his wisdom and his ability to protect his people's honor. To let this insult stand was a sign of weakness. To kill Silas Wolfe, however, would be an act of war. But the choice was about to be taken from him. Back in Prescott, Damon Wolfe was not idle. When he discovered Silas was gone along with a horse and supplies, his rage had turned to cold panic. He couldn't risk Silas being found, couldn't risk the truth coming out. Using his considerable influence, he manufactured a new, more dangerous lie. He burst into Sheriff Brody's office, his face a mask of paternal grief and fury. "The Apache," he'd roared. "They've taken my boy. Their raiding parties have become bold. They must have circled back and abducted him right from under our noses. This peace offering was a sham, a trick to make us lower our guard." The story was thin, but in the volatile atmosphere of the frontier, fear was a more potent fuel than logic. The memory of past skirmishes was still fresh. Damon called for a posse. He offered good money, invoking the sacred duty of protecting their own from savage depredations. Men who owed him money, men who craved adventure, and men who genuinely feared for their families all joined his cause. Sheriff Brody, cowed by Wolfe's power and the rising hysteria, reluctantly deputized the mob. Their stated mission was to rescue Silas Wolfe. Their true mission, known only to Damon, was to ride to Kael's camp and eliminate the evidence. He intended to wipe out the entire band, silencing Alice Silas and any Apache who knew the truth forever. A lone Apache hunter, tracking deer in the foothills, saw the dust cloud of the approaching posse. He saw the glint of dozens of rifles in the sun. He rode like the wind, his horse lathered and straining to bring the news to the rancheria. War was coming. It was riding hard for the valley, and it wore the face of Damon Wolfe. The scout's warning plunged the camp into a state of disciplined chaos. The idyllic valley was instantly transformed into a fortress. Women and children were hurried to hidden caves high in the canyon walls, their movements swift and silent. Warriors checked their rifles, sharpened their arrows, and painted their faces for the battle to come. The air, once filled with the scent of pine and roasting meat, now tasted of adrenaline and impending violence. In the center of it all stood Kyle, a storm of impossible choices raging within him. Taza and the war party were adamant. "We must strike first," Taza argued, his voice ringing with fervor. "Ambush them in the narrow pass, and we will kill the white man prisoner now. Let them find his body. It will be our answer to their lies." Silas Wolfe, tied loosely between two guards, trembled at the words, his face a sickly white. His cowardly flight had brought an army of retribution down on them all. But Kyle gaze was fixed on Alice. In the past months, she had become more than a pawn or a project. She had become a part of the fabric of their lives, a part of his life. He saw the terror in her eyes, but beneath it, a steely resolve he had come to admire. "Killing him solves nothing," Alice said, her voice cutting through the war cries. She stepped into the council circle, a shocking breach of tradition, but no one stopped her. All eyes were on her. "It will only prove to them that Damon's lies are true. They will see you as killers who abducted his son." "They see us as killers already," Taza countered. "What is your plan, white woman? To serve them tea made from your willow bark?" A few warriors laughed, but Kyle silenced them with a look. "Let her speak." "Damon Wolfe is leading them," Alice said, her voice gaining strength. "But not all of them are like him. Sheriff Brody is there. He is a weak man, but not an evil one. The others are just ranchers and townsmen who have been fed a lie. They think they are on a rescue mission. If they see Silas alive, if they hear the truth, some of them might listen." "Listen to an Apache," Taza scoffed. "They will shoot before we can speak." "They won't listen to an Apache," Alice agreed, her gaze locking with Kyle's. "But they might listen to a white woman, and to the son of the man who lied to them." A daring, desperate plan began to form. It was a gamble that risked everything, but it was the only path that didn't lead to a senseless slaughter. Kyle made his decision. He would not hide and wait for the attack. He would meet it, but on his own terms. He divided his forces. Taza and a small group of the best warriors would take to the high ridges a hidden threat to show that the Apache would not be caught unprepared. The rest would prepare defenses at the mouth of the valley. Then Kyle turned to Alice. "You believe the truth has power." "I believe it is the only thing that does," she answered. "Then you will have your chance to prove it," he said. He ordered Silas to be untied. "You will ride with us." As Wolfe's posse thundered into the wide basin that led to the valley, they were met with a startling sight. Not an ambush, not a deserted camp, but Kyle and a handful of his warriors sitting on their horses in the open. They were not painted for war. They were waiting. Damon Wolfe reined in his horse, his face livid with rage. "There they are! Get ready, men! Brody, give the order!" But before the sheriff could speak, another rider emerged from behind the Apache line. A woman in a simple doeskin dress, her blonde hair catching the afternoon sun, Alice. And beside her, on a borrowed horse, looking pale but very much alive, was Silas Wolfe. A collective gasp went through the posse. This was not what they had been told. This was not an abduction scene. "Father!" Silas cried out, his voice cracking. "Stop! You have to stop! Silence, boy!" Damon roared, his eyes wild. He was losing control of his own narrative. He's been bewitched by them. They're using him as a shield. Fire. He raised his own rifle, aiming not at Kyle, but at Alice. She was the heart of the truth, and he had to cut it out. But in that split second, two things happened. From the high ridges, a single, terrifying war cry echoed Taza, making his presence known. The men in the posse looked up, seeing the glint of rifles aimed down at them from the rocks. They were in a trap, and on the ground, Kyle moved with the speed of a striking snake. He spurred his horse directly into the path of Damon's aim, drawing his own weapon. At the same time, another horse burst from the posse's own ranks. It was Clara Mayfield, Alice's sister, her face streaked with dust, and tears had found a courage she never knew she possessed. After Silas fled, her guilt had become unbearable. She had gone to Sheriff Brody, not with a whisper, but with a full-throated confession, telling him everything about her. Silas, the lie Alice had taken on, and the true reason for her banishment. Brody, his conscience finally winning over his fear, had agreed to ride with her, hoping to head off the massacre. "He's lying," Clara screamed, pointing a trembling finger at Damon. "Wolf is the liar. Alice saved me. She's innocent. He sent her away to hide his son's shame." The posse froze, caught between the rifles above Kyle's stand below, and the raw, undeniable truth in the young girl's voice. They looked from Clara to a living Silas, then to the furious, cornered face of Damon Wolf. The lie had completely unraveled. "You fools!" Wolf shrieked, his face purple with rage. He saw his power, his reputation, his entire world crumbling to dust. He swung his rifle toward Kyle, the man who stood as the final obstacle. Sheriff Brody, finally acting as the lawman he was meant to be, drew his pistol. "Wolf, drop it!" But Damon was beyond reason. He fired. The shot cracked through the canyon. Kyle's horse screamed and fell shot through the neck. Kyle leaped clear, rolling in the dust. Before Wolf could fire again, a shot rang out from Brody's pistol, striking Wolf in the shoulder and knocking him from his saddle. The battle was over before it had truly begun. The men of the posse lowered their rifles, their faces a mixture of confusion, disgust, and relief. They had been led into a lie prepared to kill for a man's vanity. They looked at the stoic Apache warriors, at the brave woman in the doe-skin dress, and at the weeping girl who had risked everything for the truth, and they knew who the real savages were. In the ringing silence that followed the final gunshot, the world seemed to hold its breath. The sharp, acrid smell of gunpowder hung in the canyon air, a stark perfume for the truth laid bare. Dust kicked up by the falling horse, and the scuffle began to settle, revealing a tableau of shattered power. Damon Wolf lay on the ground, clutching his bleeding shoulder, his face a mask of disbelief and agony. The aura of invincibility that had surrounded him his entire life had vanished, leaving only a pathetic, wounded old man. The men of the posse looked from Wolf's crumpled form to the stoic line of Apache warriors, then to Alice standing tall and resolute beside the trembling son who had exposed it all. The lie had been the foundation of their righteousness, and now with that foundation gone, they were adrift in a sea of shame. Sheriff Brody, his pistol still smoking, walked stiffly to Wolf, the weight of his office finally settling back onto his shoulders where it belonged. "Damon Wolf." Brody's voice was cold iron, devoid of its usual deference. "You are under arrest for attempted murder, incitement of violence, and bearing false witness." Wolf sputtered, trying to push himself up. "You can't. I am this town. These savages, these people defended themselves from a lie you created." Brody cut him off. kicking Wolf's rifle away. Two men from the posse, their faces grim, moved to help the sheriff, hauling Wolf to his feet. His pained gasps found no sympathy. As they bound his hands, the other men began to turn their horses, unwilling to meet the eyes of Alice Kael or any of the Chiricahua. They had ridden out as a righteous mob, ready to deal death for a man's honor, and were riding back as fools who had nearly become murderers for his vanity. They departed not in a thunder of hooves, but in a quiet, shameful procession that was its own form of defeat. With the posse gone, Kael gave a series of low commands. His warriors moved with fluid efficiency, securing the perimeter, before focusing their attention on the remaining outsider. Silas Wolf was brought forward, his journey of escape ending here in the heart of the very world he was fleeing. He didn't struggle. The fight had gone out of him, replaced by a hollow resignation. He knelt in the dust before Kael and the elders who had gathered awaiting his fate. Taza stepped forward, his expression hard. "He is the serpent's son," he said, his voice resonating with cold fury. "His weakness brought this army to our home. His father's lie was an insult to our honor, an insult that demands a blood price. The law of our people is clear. He must die, so all Inda know that the Ende cannot be deceived." Taza's gaze swept over the other warriors, and many nodded in grim agreement. His logic was rooted in their tradition. Justice had to be seen. Honor had to be restored. Silas closed his eyes, his throat working as he waited for the final blow. But then Alice's voice, calm and clear, cut through the tense air. "And what justice is there in that?" she asked, stepping toward the circle. The elders turned to her, their expressions unreadable but attentive. She had earned the right to speak. "Killing him will not erase his father's lies. It will not unfire the bullets or heal the mistrust. It will only continue the cycle of violence that has bled this land for generations." She looked at Nalin, whose wise eyes encouraged her. "You have taught me of Gojho," she said, using the Apache word for balance and harmony. "You taught me that the people walk in beauty. Is there beauty in this, or is it just more pain? His true punishment is not a quick death. It is the life he must now lead. Let him walk the earth carrying the full weight of his actions. Let his weakness be his burden, to carry not an excuse for more bloodshed." She turned her gaze to Kael, her eyes pleading with him to see the future, not just the past. Kael stood in silence for a long moment, the fate of a man resting on his word. He looked at Taza, acknowledging the truth in his warriors' anger and the demands of their laws. He looked at Silas, a man broken not by Apache warriors, but by his own cowardice. Finally, his eyes rested on Alice. He saw not the white woman he had been given, but a leader in her own right, speaking with a wisdom that blended the compassion of her old world with the strength of her new one. He saw a path forward that was not about retribution, but about resilience. "Alice speaks with a strong heart," Kael declared, his voice carrying the finality of command. "His death would be an easy thing. It would make us feel strong for a moment, but it would not make our people safer. We will not take his life." He motioned to one of his men. "Give him a skin of water." Then he looked down at Silas. "You will be banished. Walk east until this land is nothing but a memory. Tell anyone who asks that you were shown mercy by the Chiricahua Apache, so they know we are people of honor, not butchers." Silas looked up, his eyes wide with a dawning, shocked gratitude. He was given the water skin, and without a word was turned to face the rising sun. He began to walk, a lone figure disappearing into the vast wilderness, his life spared, but his soul forever marked. As the tension finally broke, Clara rushed to Alice, throwing her arms around her sister in a desperate, clinging embrace. Tears streamed down her face, washing away weeks of guilt. "Alice, I'm so sorry," she sobbed into her sister's shoulder. "I was a coward. I let you take it all, the shame, the banishment. Every night I prayed you were alive." Alice held her tight, stroking her hair. "Hush now," she whispered, her own voice thick with emotion. "You were scared, but you found your courage when it mattered most, Clara. You rode here. You spoke the truth. You came for me." She pulled back, holding Clara at arm's length, really looking at her. The flighty girl was gone, replaced by a young woman with a new somber strength in her eyes. "I am so proud of the woman you are becoming." Sheriff Brody approached them, his dusty hat held respectfully in his hands. "Miss Mayfield, Alice," he began, his voice heavy with contrition. "There are no words to say what the town of Prescott owes you. We were blind, and we let a venomous man lead us. Your name is cleared. Wolf's assets will be seized by the territory. Your family will not want for anything. I'll see to it personally." He took a deep breath. "You are free. You can come home." The word home. It hung in the air, a powerful, complicated invitation. She could return to her father, to the familiar streets, to the life that had been stolen from her. She could have safety, comfort, and respect. She looked at Clara's hopeful face, feeling the pull of sisterly love and duty. But then her gaze drifted past them into the valley. She saw Narlin directing women to repair a damaged drying rack. She saw Chatto's young son, the boy she had healed, chasing a lizard near the creek, his laughter echoing softly. She saw the warm glow of fires being lit inside the familiar shapes of the wickiups. This was not a place of ghosts. It was a place of life, raw and difficult, but real. Her life. She turned back to Brody, a gentle but resolute finality in her eyes. "Thank you, Sheriff, but I think my home is here now." She smiled at Clara, a smile of love and farewell. "Please tell Father. Tell him I have found my own people. Tell him the woman he raised found her purpose. And tell him," she added softly, "that I am happy." Clara's eyes filled with tears again, but this time they were tears of understanding. She saw the peace on her sister's face, the easy way she stood on this foreign soil, the way her eyes kept finding the tall warrior with the sling on his arm. She hugged Alice one last time, a farewell that was not an ending, but an acknowledgement of their separate, hard-won futures. After they had gone, and the last of the dust had settled, Kael walked to Alice's side. The sun was a fiery artist painting the western peaks in brilliant strokes of crimson and gold. The valley was bathed in a soft, peaceful light, filled with the gentle rhythms of a life resuming its course. "You chose a hard life," Kael said, his voice a low rumble beside her. Alice watched a hawk circle high above them, free and untethered. "I chose an honest one," she replied, turning to look at him. "Among honest people." He nodded, a flicker of old pain and new hope in his eyes. "When Wolf raised his rifle, I thought he would." He didn't finish, but she understood. The fear he had felt for her was a confession more intimate than any words. He reached out his calloused fingers, gently touching her cheek. His touch no longer clinical or commanding, but full of a reverence that made her heart ache with a beautiful soaring joy. "They threw you away in shame," he murmured, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw. "But your spirit was too strong to be broken by their brittle world. It found its own ground to take root here in the rocks and the pines. He smiled then, a genuine, unguarded smile that lit his entire face. I told you once that you belonged here. He drew her a half-step closer, his other hand finding hers, their fingers lacing together in a perfect fit. His voice dropped to a whisper, a sacred promise meant only for her. But I was not finished. You belong right here, with me. Leaning into his strength, surrounded by the vast, wild beauty of her true home, Alice Mayfield knew she was no longer a name attached to a lie. She was a woman, loved a spirit unbound. She was exactly where she belonged. Alice's journey from a pawn in a game of shame to a cherished member of a new family shows us that home isn't always the place we are born. It's the place where we are seen for who we truly are. Her story is a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the idea that true belonging is earned through courage, compassion, and the unwavering strength to define your own worth, even when the world tries to define it for you. She was handed away as a broken thing, but in the heart of the Wild West, she found she was whole all along. If her incredible story of survival and redemption resonated with you, please take a moment to hit the like button and share it with someone who loves a powerful tale from the Old West. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you won't miss our next journey into the dramatic untold stories of history. Thank you for listening.